So today we have some routine maintenance to do on the Gallardo along with my first maintenance repair. Now I've got a lot of comments over the last year and a half. Is this car expensive to own as far as routine maintenance goes? The answer is no. Now with this, I've had it for about a year and a half. I've driven it a little over 5,000 miles. Last March of 2024, I did the first oil change as an owner of the car. I like to do the oil change on all of my cars once a year or every 5,000 miles, whatever comes first. So fast forward 1 year from the first oil change, it is now 4,000 miles later, and early spring is when I like to do the oil changes on all my cars to keep them in tip-top shape. So today we're gonna do an oil change on the 2014 Lamborghini Gallardo and then repair a thing that has been a little funky. So before we get to the repair, where do I get my oil? Because some people think you have to go to Lamborghini, spend $1,000. So this is the oil. It's nothing all too fancy, just European full synthetic 5W30. Now with that, I have 10 quarts of it, as well as an OEM style oil filter. All that is less than 150 bucks. It's really not that expensive. You'll see a little bit of the process today. Obviously it's nothing really all too hard to do. Now, where do I get my oil? Well, I ordered all of this from ECS Tuning, and as of now, depending on when you're watching this video, they're giving away an Audi RS3. For every dollar you spend, you're gonna be entered in to win their car. So that is super cool to be able to let you guys know that. They have obviously normal maintenance items like you're seeing in today's video, but you can also buy performance parts like what we've done on the RS3 that we own. So great place to get your maintenance things for your cars. Definitely check that link out in the description. And then here is what I'm replacing. This is an oil level sensor that goes in the rear tank of this car. So here's what's been going on with the Gallardo for the last couple months. So if you look at the top gauges, the top left one is the oil pressure. The center one is the oil temperature. Those gauges have been acting up a little while, and it has been a little sketchy driving this until I figured out exactly what was going on. So I took a couple of videos of the car over the last couple of weeks. Here's what the car's been doing. We have our pressure gauge and our temperature gauge. Notice the temperature gauge is all the way down at basically 0. However, when I accelerate a little bit, you can tell the pressure gauge kind of went up a little bit higher than it did. And then now all of a sudden the temperature gauge is going back to normal, and the pressure gauge obviously is back to normal as well. So these gauges have been a little wonky. As you can see, coolant's all good. And then another time driving, the temperature gauge went all the way up to full heat, which is pretty scary at first if you're not sure what is going on. So that has happened several times in the last couple months of driving the car. It is intermittent though. And as you can tell, driving now, accelerating, the pressure stays good. So whenever the temperature gauge went down to 0, the pressure gauge would get all weird, but whenever the temperature gauge went all the way up, it was fine. And then as you can see, we have the minimum light this time, which again, intermittent, so it wasn't every single time. Revving the car and everything, the pressure all stays normal when the temperature gauge is also normal. So really interesting to see these weird oil lights popping up from time to time. So this one, once again, temperature is all the way down, the pressure was increasing, and then as temperature goes back to normal, the pressure goes back to normal as well. Now the first time this happened, I was doing a little cruise with some friends. Everything was fine in the morning, and then when I stopped the car later in the day, started it up, I had the light on the dashboard popping up. And at that time, I didn't quite know what was going on. The pressure and the temperature gauge were being weird, and then trying to drive the car, it all of a sudden went back to normal. And then all of a sudden the temperature would shoot up. So I'm sitting there thinking that my engine is overheating or something. I limped the car home, I drove it because it was, again, intermittent. The gauges would be normal and then they would act up again. Now I scanned the car when this happened to try to clear codes or something, and it came up with just intermittent level sensor not working. So it wasn't like a check engine light that never came on, it was simply the sensor that was coming up. That's why I kind of had confidence to drive the car home, because it just said sensor. It wasn't a true check engine light. So with that said, let's go ahead and fire it up. We'll see what it does today. Again, it's not every single time. I drove it yesterday, 40 miles, and had no issues. So everything is good right now. Sometimes right now, this gauge will already be full on the hot. And of course, everything is looking good right now, no big deal. The pressure has increased to where it should be. Temperature is all good. little time has passed. Went ahead and got all the oil nice and drained out of the car. There are 7 drain plugs down below. I'll have the tools listed in the description. Right, so with everything stripped off, I took both side panels off, the center panel, air box, and just moved the filters out of the way. So not the worst access. You can kind of see it up here, I believe. And we're just gonna use a T30 and slowly start getting this bolt out of the way. So working on those bolts, the first one is super easy to gain access to, which is that little silver one right there. Now you can see I have the wrench down there, the little socket. That one is interesting to get to because, of course, Lamborghini has put a metal bracket right there in front of it, so I can't gain access to that bolt from this side where I have room to work. Wow, that is such little clearance. All right, there we go. That is the bolt on the bottom one, and then the upper one is just right there. All right, now we're gonna unplug it. Gotta figure out how to fish this thing out of here. So those upper bolts were the lifesaver just to get this tank enough wiggle room, and now we've got the old sensor out, which 99% sure that has been the problem with the gauge. Again, this is, a car built in 2013, so makes sense, little things here and there. This was about $300, so it wasn't the worst thing in the world. So new one, I'm gonna carefully reinstall this now just by spreading that open a little bit, and you kinda gotta stick it in at an angle, and then we can twist and line it up, and then it'll end up sitting just like that. Okay, so I gotta get it in, angled down. Okay, so a little bit of off-camera work. I finally got the new sensor in. Whoever designed where this tank goes, that little metal bracket in front of it is literally 2 millimeters too much in the way. So after removing the 2 bottom bolts that hold this tank in, I was able to pull this a little bit farther back and up. And as you can tell, I got the sensor back into place. So with that all buttoned up, one thing I noticed on the under tray back here, there is a little spot of some dampness. The lid looks like that is where it is coming from. So checking everything out, I got the lid off sitting right here. This just pops on and there's no hose clamp or anything. And as you can see, there's a lot of accumulation around this specific point. So I don't think there's anything leaking legit, like in the tank or anything like that. The system's all been fine, but I think where this connects to here, I think we're just leaking a little bit. But it looks like everything's fine. I don't think there's anything to worry about for the egear system, but I think just the rubber little hose where it fits to this isn't the most secure thing in the world. Like literally there wasn't much resistance pulling this off. So I'm gonna use a hose clamp on that just to get it nice and tight. And it's not too hard to take this all back apart and add a little bit more egear fluid. Other than that though, I think we're looking in tip-top shape. Button this up, swap oil filters, and then we're almost done. Everything is buttoned up. I went ahead and put 8 quarts of oil in the car, cleaned up that egear line as well. So now let's go ahead, fire up the car, see what we got to work with. That is insanely loud like this. My car just has an X pipe on the exhaust. But we'll let it cycle a little bit, get some oil flowing through everything, let it warm up a little bit. So after letting it run for about 2 minutes or so,
you can see with it cleaned up, the oil line is right around the F in fill. And that would make some sense given it is still cold, since I didn't exactly let it get up to operating temperature. But I think I'm gonna leave it at 8 quarts for right now, and then we'll actually warm it up like that. And once it's warm, it should get closer to the middle. Under cold being the dry sump that this is, you know, this is how it's supposed to be when it is cold. So I think we're looking good with 8 quarts in the car. And then now it is time to button up the underside, double check for anything leaking or anything. So that is it, oil change done, and the new sensor has now been installed. That did take me all day, but overall, not really the worst thing. The sensor itself really isn't that hard to do, just all the engine stuff comes out and it's right there. Really just figuring out how to get that sensor out. There was like no clearance, so like a millimeter, not enough room, which is, of course, that's how the engineers are going to do it. So with that said, I'm gonna clean up the garage. Everything is buttoned up, nothing leaking. I'll let the car warm up and then double check the oil level. All right, so driving in the car, as you'll notice, the temperature and pressure gauge are looking normal, even under acceleration. Everything is exactly where it should be. So it was definitely interesting driving the car when the temperature gauge would go to 0. It would affect the pressure gauge for whatever reason, and then under acceleration, the pressure would increase almost to the red, which was a little nerve-wracking. I'm not exactly sure what happens if the oil pressure gets too high, and I didn't want to find out on this V10. And then whenever the temperature gauge would just go all the way to hot, that scared me the first time because, you know, I didn't know if my engine was overheating, what was going on. I stopped like 4 times on my way home that day to try to figure out, you know, if the car was overheating. So that was definitely a little nerve-wracking. I guess I've driven it about 600 miles since that first happened, once I figured out exactly what was going on. But everything is looking good on the car. All the gauges are looking correct, no big deal. Everything is reading where it should. All right, back at the house now after my test drive, after the oil change, as well as the new oil level sensor replacement. So now what I need to do is check the level of the oil once again, just to make sure everything is in tip-top shape now that I have warmed it up. But that is repairing the oil level sensor, how to replace it on a Gallardo. If you own a Gallardo and you notice your temperature or pressure gauge start acting up like what you saw in my car, having the lights coming up intermittently, most likely it's your level sensor. Kind of interesting that the level sensor has to do with the temperature as well as the pressure gauge, and weird how they're kind of all looped together, and when one's acting up, they all kind of freak out. But nonetheless, not the worst job out there. And for those of you with a car, you know, look at ECS tuning for not only maintenance stuff, but they even have OEM parts. So this sensor is actually on their website. So a really cool place just to get your maintenance stuff for your cars, things like that, as well as aftermarket goodies. And depending on when you're watching this video, they're giving away an Audi RS3, and every dollar spent, you are entered in to win. All that information is going to be linked down below, so you can read up on the giveaway. Of course, it will end in a couple weeks from the day of this upload. But other than that, check out their website for all your maintenance and things like that for your car. And now the Gallardo is ready for spring, ready to keep racking up the miles. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, stay tuned for plenty more content, and I'll see you all in the next video.